What is risk? It's kind of like a philosophical question, but it's fundamental to what we do in finance. The very foundational work in finance looks at risk with respect to a well-diversified portfolio. So the question is, what is a well-diversified portfolio? Well, we have to define that somehow. And the way that it was originally defined was in terms of a portfolio that includes enough securities that we get rid of a large amount of the variance. So if we held one security, there's a lot of variance as a result of that, because we're bearing kind of like fundamental risks as well as company-specific risks. But as we build our portfolio and include more securities, that a lot of these company-specific risks are washed away. And this is kind of what the well-diversified portfolio is. It's defined in terms of variance. And you know how the model basically works. After that fundamental sort of discussion of risk in terms of variance, and the Markowitz efficient frontier was developed, shortly thereafter, we had the capital asset pricing model that defined the risk of a security as its contribution to the variance of this well-diversified portfolio. But really what I want to do is to explore the notion that variance is risk. Let's think about variance. What is variance? Well, variance, you take the return and you look at the average return, you subtract them, and you square it, and then you add it up and divide by the number of observations. So it's a measure of dispersion from the mean. And it's a very simple measure. Now for me, risk is not just dispersion. There's different types of dispersion. There's dispersion where the stock return goes above its mean. Now I like that. Then there's dispersion when the stock goes below its mean, and I don't like that. But in the calculation of variance, the kind of positive surprise is treated exactly the same as the negative surprise. For me personally, I guess I'm more interested in assigning a measure of risk to the negative portions, the downside. But that's not what variance does. So variance is a symmetric measure. Everything is symmetric. The positives and negatives are treated equally, and we simply measure the dispersion. The capital asset pricing model is implemented, simply says that the security's risk depends on its contribution to this variance. And again, the variance is symmetric. There's no distinguishing upside and downside. To me, this is an incomplete story and an incomplete framework. While variance is definitely important, the level of dispersion is important, I want to know something about the probabilities of a big negative return relative to the probabilities of a big positive return. And that has to do with skewness. And indeed, all of the frameworks that we've developed in terms of asset pricing just assumes all of that away. It's variance that counts. Either our utility is a simple function of the expected return and the variance, or we assume that all of the data are normally distributed. With normal distributions, the only thing that counts is the mean, the variance, and the covariances. There's nothing more. There's no distinguishing of upside versus downside. So in this course, what we're going to do is to look beyond the standard paradigm and try to build upon it, to come up with a richer notion of risk that includes a way to distinguish between upside and downside.